What did Ojukwu really want in Aburi? Was he a secessionist in waiting, already determined to break Nigeria apart, or a reluctant nationalist pushed beyond endurance by fear and betrayal? Nearly 60 years later, the Aburi Accord remains one of the most contested moments in Nigerian history. Aburi did not emerge out of nowhere. The meeting arose from a Nigeria that had just gone through coups, counter-coups, and genocidal killings. Aburi was necessary for a country in which trust had collapsed and survival had become a regional concern rather than a national guarantee. Ojukwu did not come to Aburi waving the banner of independence, even if the signs were there. No doubt, the Aburi Accord showed promise, but it failed. This would eventually degenerate into a civil war where both sides would pass the blame on each other. The consequences that still echo today. So, what did Ojukwu really want in Aburi? We seek to find out in this episode. By the end of 1966, Nigeria existed more in name than in spirit. The twin coups of that year had shattered the illusion of a shared national destiny, replacing it with suspicion etched along ethnic and regional lines. The January coup had removed the old political elite, while the July counter-coup drenched the military in blood and transformed barracks into killing fields. For Easterners, particularly the Igbo, the massacres that followed in northern Nigeria were unfortunate, to say the least. Trains and lorries arrived in the east packed with refugees whose stories spoke of abandonment by the government that claimed to protect them. It was against this backdrop that the Aburi Accord was conceived. Ghana, under General Joseph Ankara, offered neutral ground where Nigeria's military leaders could meet away from the pressure of public posturing. Aburi, a hill town known for its calm, became the setting for what was effectively Nigeria's last attempt to argue its way out of collapse. For Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, the military governor of the eastern region, the journey to Aburi was undertaken with deep doubts, yet also with a sense of obligation. He could not easily dismiss a meeting that promised, at least in theory, to address the fears of his people. Ojukwu arrived at Aburi for a serious meeting. Gowon, on the other hand, saw the gathering as a reunion of friends, especially as Ojukwu had boycotted every meeting the Supreme Military Council held in Nigeria. Ojukwu had said he was not sure of his safety. The killings of 1966 had convinced him that the Nigerian state as constituted was either unwilling or unable to protect Easterners. This belief hardened into a guiding principle. Security must be structural, not rhetorical. The Aburi Accord appealed to Ojukwu precisely because it promised structure. He was deeply suspicious of unilateral authority, particularly within a military system where decrees could be issued overnight. In his view, Nigeria's tragedy stemmed from excessive central power concentrated in too few hands. Aburi, therefore, was an opportunity to redesign the state in a way that made abuse difficult, if not impossible. His legalistic approach at Aburi often frustrated his colleagues, but it reflected a deliberate strategy. Every clause mattered because every ambiguity could later be exploited. Ojukwu understood that once the conference ended, interpretation would become power. The Aburi Accord, as he saw it, had to be precise enough to survive a return to Nigeria. At its core, the Aburi Accord was about redefining authority. The agreement reached in Ghana emphasized collective leadership through the Supreme Military Council and rejected the notion of absolute power vested in a single head of state. For Ojukwu, this was the most important achievement of Aburi. Decisions of national consequences were to be made collectively, not imposed. This interpretation of the Aburi Accord effectively dismantled the unitary tendencies that had crept into Nigeria's military governance. It restored the regions as meaningful centers of power and recognized their right to control their internal security. Ojukwu believed Nigeria would function best when its diversity was balanced by autonomy. The Aburi Accord also represented an attempt to civilize military rule. By embedding consultation and consensus into governance, it sought to replace the culture of orders with a culture of agreement. In this sense, Aburi was revolutionary. It acknowledged that Nigeria's survival depended not on stronger command, but on mutual restraint. For Ojukwu, as long as Lagos retained the ability to deploy force as it willed, unity would remain fragile. The Eastern region's insistence on regional control of troops was therefore a demand for safety. Aburi sought to ensure that the instruments of violence could no longer be turned against a region without its consent. This vision clashed sharply with federal anxieties about disintegration. To the military leaders in Lagos, the Aburi Accord appeared to weaken the center at a time when firmness seemed necessary. What Ojukwu saw as balance, others saw as paralysis. The tension between these perspectives lay dormant at Aburi, but would soon erupt with devastating consequences. It did not take long before the Aburi Accord failed. Upon returning to Nigeria, the federal military government issued Decree 8, which, in Ojukwu's view, contradicted both the spirit and the letter of what had been agreed. To Ojukwu, this confirmed his deepest fears, that Aburi had been a tactical pause rather than a genuine commitment. Trust, once broken, proved impossible to restore. The decree deepened the sense of betrayal in the East and reinforced the belief that agreements could be undone at will. The Aburi Accord, instead of stabilizing Nigeria, became a symbol of duplicity. What had been hailed as a breakthrough now appeared as evidence that the federal system was incapable of honoring its own compromises. This collapse of trust was fatal. Without trust, federalism became meaningless and unity turned into coercion. Aburi had failed not because its ideas were unworkable, but because its implementation required a level of good faith that no longer existed. On May 30, 1967, Ojukwu eventually declared the Eastern region an independent Republic of Biafra. The failure of the Aburi Accord convinced him that Nigeria could not be restructured peacefully in a way that guaranteed the safety of the Easterners. In this sense, Biafra was the child of Aburi's collapse. The declaration of secession represented a rejection of coercive unity, not of unity itself. Ojukwu framed Biafra as a moral necessity born out of betrayal and fear. Whether history judges that decision as inevitable or tragic, it cannot be understood without reference to Aburi. The civil war that followed consumed over 1 million lives and damaged Nigeria permanently. Nearly 60 years on, the Aburi Accord remains a ghost in Nigeria's political imagination. It is invoked whenever debates about restructuring, federalism, and decentralization resurface. What Ojukwu really wanted at Aburi was a Nigeria governed by balance, restraint, and mutual respect. He wanted a state strong enough to endure, but limited enough not to terrorize its own citizens. The tragedy of the Aburi Accord is that It revealed Nigeria's problems with painful clarity and offered solutions that were never fully embraced. No doubt, Aburi failed, but its questions endure. How should power be shared in a diverse state? How can unity be preserved without coercion? And how many times can agreements be broken before separation becomes inevitable? In answering these questions, the Aburi Accord remains less a closed chapter than an unfinished argument, one that continues to shape Nigeria's history and its future.